Mm, yeah, it's a little low. So if it sounds like I'm a bit under the weather, it's because I am. But I'm not gonna let that stop me. I'm also trying to get this thing low enough to where high enough actually to where I can look here and not because if it looks like I've been looking over the camera, it's because I have been. It's strange dealing with it these days. So, um, I'm willing to do this at the time that I'm doing this because in my spare time, of which I have had a lot lately, I'm a writer. And if there's one, I'm not saying this so you can congratulate me on my purity. I'm saying this as part of the beginning of a greater point. Um, you know, let's see, trying to get it. It's when it comes down to it, um, our art is about communication, and that's one of the things that drew me in to art, into um, you know, writing, into movie making, which is another pursuit of mine, um, and photography. I look at the results of AI, and I shouldn't be dishonest. Some of it is beautiful. Some of it is amazing to look at. I've done my share of AI generation, but at the same time, I want when it comes down to it, I'm going to look for one thing. I will never use AI to write a story. I might use some randomized process, kind of roll some dice or use a spreadsheet to kind of mix and match sort of um, elements. But at the same time, in the end, I found that to a certain extent, um, what you can automate too much, and you can end up creating content, but not content with meaning when you automate certain things. And I much prefer, you know, see, there's a certain aspect of all this. There's a certain we get so wrapped up in wanting to get a lot of work done quickly that we kind of forget that some work is best done in its own good time. That for human beings, it takes time to think. For human beings, it takes time to make wise judgments. And we're building a society that is built on a kind of rashness and a kind of false, you know, belief that we can somehow distill an equation that somehow will give us, magically give us um, the truth, the knowledge that we want, the experience that we want. You um, and I just find, you know, part of the reason why I became a writer in the first place was that I had a very difficult time socially. I had a very difficult time dealing with people um, because I've got an autism spectrum disorder, so I'm not very good at negotiating with people if there's not a filter, I guess you could say. Uh, I find it much easier to just talk at people, not necessarily talk with people. And so I understand some of the temptations here. But what occurs to me, and what I see in terms of the technology as a whole is that people are vastly overestimating the intelligence of AI or machine learning platforms, and they are unfortunately deciding in their foolishness, they're deciding to put too much of the burden of thinking, of judgment, of learning and understanding on AI that hasn't actually developed well enough to do it for real. I mean, the plot of many of the movies out there about AI has essentially been about, oh, they're going to get too smart and their high speed of calculation will enable them to outthink us, to out, out, you know, to just do this frontal lobe sort of stuff and just go, you know, ham on that and outbrain us, out intellect us. And that's the sort of Oedipal um, complex we have about machine learning. And the irony of that is that what it's turning out, the problem that's turning out to be is that AI isn't actually, machine learning isn't that intelligent. It's just very good at imitating the products of intelligence. So it can hash out a computer program that maybe works. It can make you an image that feels meaningful. It can make a short movie. It can make your favorite characters say what you want them to say. You can. The problem, the problem really is that it lacks general intelligence. It lacks actual intelligence. It's generative in terms of being able to create a block of text, create an essay. It can generate a short thing that, is perhaps sometimes accurate about a subject that you're looking up. And I've seen that many times. And I do click the links from time to time just to see what's, the basis of what it's saying. But again and again, it's sort of like my impulse, my instinct is to go back and check myself. Why is that? Because even if we get AI, real AI, we need it to be a companion, not a crutch. To Because really, and by companion, I don't mean social companion. We need actual human beings as social companions. We need them as complements to human creativity, complements to human productivity, complements to discovery and programming and STEM and all those other things. And why do we need that? Because the alternative is a dark age. A dark age masquerading as a golden age. And I don't say this as I don't say this as a pessimist. I believe that we can develop more creative, more useful uh, AI that I believe it's, the problem of artificial general intelligence is a solvable one. But we're going down a very expensive dead end. And that dead end is basically trying to distill the essence of our creativity, of our ability to write, of our ability to create images, to create movies, trying to distill everything into some sort of secret sauce. And, using that to be more and more and more and more productive. The productivity treadmill is killing humanity. It's leading us down a very deadly path. Uh, we're, we're kind of forgetting something critical about what technology is supposed to do. Technology is supposed to make it easier to survive. Technology is supposed to make it easier to solve problems, easier to be happy. But we forget about being happy and we decide that we're just going to pile on more and more and more work, get more and more and more done. And it's not that I'm lazy, but I've got a sensibility that being productive to me is more than just you've got a lot of pages written, or you've got of a lot of tickets cleared, or a lot of this or a lot of that. Productivity for me is also the quality of what is resolved, the quality of what is finished, the usefulness of what you succeed at. When I write a story, I'm writing not just to, I'm writing for more than just the purpose of, you know, producing pages, producing, you know, or even hitting plot points. At a very important level, a story, a plot, and what happens within the story, the details of what goes on, those are th- that can actually be said to be the actual plot when you get down to it. There's the sort of the plot point, as you might generalize it, and then there's the what actually organically grows through the sequence of story, through this, through how the characters behave, through what the characters try to do. You know, and it's not all logic. There's a significant amount of emotion tied up in and that's part of the thing. Part of the experience is sort of that quality of being embedded in that world, that you're dealing. I like to kind of treat the world of my story. I like to try and treat it as if it's like our world, and like it's got like there are police, there's a government system, there's controversies, there's history. I like it to relate it in such a way where you might just say that this is simply the way things work in this universe, and you don't really have to think too hard about what's going on, that you just effortlessly experience it instead of having to kind of pump yourself up to believe what's going on. Oh, this is, to me, it's an important thing that the audience be engaged, that have a stake in it, that they be kind of pulled along by the needs and the desires of the characters. So, what is that compared to what an AI can do? The AI doesn't understand motivation in either character motivation or the motivation for telling a story in the first place. A lot of that story in the Prophet Amir Sinach, which is the story I've written and which I'm creating a new draft of. A lot of the motivation for that comes out of the post 9/11 world and what happened thereafter. It asks questions about government, about our rights, about the problems and just trusting everything to one person who who we think can solve everything. An AI doesn't understand that. It might be able to imitate that in a limited way, but it really can't go back, ruminate, go back and forth, kind of go, you know, kind of figure out the nuances or whatever. It really can't do that. It just doesn't have the ability to reflect on what it's doing as an embedded human being, as somebody who cares about the way the world works, about how it might unfold. An AI doesn't know how to love. It doesn't know how to even. It doesn't even fail to figure out how to love the way human being can figure out a way to fail to know how to love. It can imitate what others have done before if it's been trained on enough of it, but it just it lacks that kind of embedding in the world that I think we need to really get into something. And so you got a lot of stuff that a human being is going to have to go back and touch if you want it to be anywhere near interesting to people. And folks get the idea, oh, it's productive, oh, it's productive, oh, it's productive. I can do 45 pages in a second, 45 pages, 100 pages. They get the notion, okay, it's doing a lot of work, so it must be doing something well. And that's the attitude of a lot of MBA trained executives never actually who don't actually watch the stuff that they put out, who I imagine are too busy trying to just roll over a certain percentage. And I see this time and time again, folks making decisions by algorithm that they ought to be making by human beings. Like, for example, when you continue a series, again and again, I hear complaints about series being ended just as they're getting interesting. Now, that's something an algorithm might do because it might see, I don't know, that the production is getting too expensive for the amount of profit it's drawing out. But that's just it's a short-sighted way of looking at the world. I mean, you should be as a content creator. Well, screw content creator. Screw that label because anybody can create content. A person squatting on a toilet can create content. It's not, and now a computer can do the same. You know, content is it's anything. But what makes art interesting is not content. It's what's called logical depth. And what do I mean by that? And I say this not to reduce the value of art down to just some information theory sort of equation. But we can use information theory to kind of get part of why storytelling is such an important, rich experience because we can understand that part of it is we are embedded in our own sort of stories, our own sort of lives. We're embedded in that. Um, we're embedded in that, and because we're embedded in that, um, we we don't have to reconstruct. We don't have to have everything spelled out. We can just assume certain things are true. We can just assume, that there are certain institutions that do this, that, and the other. We can assume that there are laws in a given fictional universe. Whether that's a cop procedural, the police procedural, or a fantasy story. We can assume that we can assume that people go, eat, go to the restroom, you know, do a variety of things, go to work, have jobs, so on and so forth. We don't need to just, make a detailed thing about everything that people do. We can throw away a lot of that information and just present the hints of it, the sort of the signs that these sort of things exist. We can we can let the audience reconstruct a great deal of the reality, so to speak, the quote unquote reality of the world, and leave the significant parts in the story. Leave the parts that they can't reconstruct so easily. The parts that are important, meaningful, the parts that represent surprising developments or that represent important, significant developments. We can do something that is much more what you might call um, elegant and pungent and meaningful. I mean, that's what the people are ending the seasons, of a series, who are cutting off the season at season 3 or season 2. That's what they're failing to realize is that yes, it is less productive per dollar to keep on going, but once you have people hooked, once you have, you can run the story to a more organic completion. And having done that, you will have something that people will keep on going back to, that you can revive. Look at all the content that people are reviving in legacy sequels. Look at all the stuff they're kind of bringing back, or the stuff that is showing up in reaction videos because you know folks in, or because it's well made. This is because in those days there was no sense of an, you know let's not be dishonest, there was a sense of marketing, and you know that you would have to, that you couldn't do this or you couldn't do that because the test audiences or the focus groups or whatever said this or did this. But at the very least, there was a point where folks would have to be left alone to just say, okay, what are we going to do? And we've got less of that these days. We got more unfortunate trust in algorithms to tell you exactly what works, exactly what's popular, exactly this. We're doing less thinking, less guessing. We're doing less random things. Mm. And we're just trying to automate things that don't actually automate well. Pardon me for a moment. Oh. Okay. Sorry about that interruption. It's like this. We're embedded. We live in a we don't just live in the world as some digital ghosts. We live in this world as human beings that live, that breathe, sometimes with more difficulty than we'd like, who need things like cars and houses over our heads, who desire friendship, desire the opposite sex or the same sex or whatever. We we live. Some of us live for money. Some of us live for experiences. For to some of us live to seek thrills, and others live to sit on a mountaintop and admire a view. And I think our culture has become very narrowed in its appetites. And our appreciation of other people has become very narrowed, very cultivated and curated and separated. And, you know, like instead of a system being there to kind of mix things together, we have a system that is sort of built to parse things apart as if you can just be that reductive about human experience, as if you can be that sort of, like everybody is just as simple as, oh, this person's an outdoorsman, and oh, this person is likes film noir, and this and that and the other. There's not enough of appreciation, I think, for randomness, for happenstance and serendipity. And we got a system that is built on trying to make everything depressingly predictable, trying to predetermine everything, trying to silo and send people down a an atomistic sort of one way um, sort of course, and it's impoverishing us as a culture. It's dividing us as a culture. It's making us think that there could not possibly be any common ground. The reality is there's ground with other people. You know, it's making us forget that we're not just simply players in some cosmic drama, that we are human beings who live next door to each other, that we have relatives and friends who are more valuable than loyalty to some figure or another. But also, another problem is there's, from the start, really, there's been a flood of false people, so to speak, of mindless false figures, bots, of folks whose basic existence is internet, who don't really exist as real people, but who come across as real people. And I might be one of those people who's the least capable of distinguishing. I'll argue with anything. Um, but it's like, here's the thing. I would rather have a conversation with a human being who I can go back and forth with than another conversation with some, you know, either artificial or real idiot who's just repeating the same sort of programmed responses mindlessly without understanding. Who, if there's one thing I hate these days, it's the sort of person who tries to act like you're the idiot for believing something that you have learned backwards and forwards better than they ever could or ever did. It's like folks talk about natural immunity. This is the origin of the name of my podcast. I call it the vaccinated sound because I kept getting response from people, as an insult. You sound vaccinated, and that's meant to be a implied. You're a freaking idiot. But the irony is, it's a left-handed compliment. Um, Basically, you're telling me that I sound like somebody who believes in science, who believes that one should protect other people, that, you know, uh, that I want to be part of one of humanity's greatest successes, which is the conquest of most infectious diseases that have limited the life expectancy of most human beings at birth since time immemorial. You know, so should I feel ashamed of that? If there's one thing I believe, it's that there's no point in being ashamed of seeking intelligence. And I'll say that as opposed to talking about being smart, because what's the point of just being like sitting there? Oh, I'm smart. Oh, what's the point of that? Intelligence is good to the extent it's used and used well, to the point where it's brought to bear to generate wisdom, to the point where it's brought to bear to understand how to use technology, how to use knowledge well. That's the thing, really, because it's like um, it's like, what is the point of learning all these things if you're just learning them to forget them? If you're just learning them to pass the test and then you forget them. And part of the key, I think, about remembering systems of understanding, like science and all these other things, is to learn how things interrelate, how things embed in the rest of reality. Because once you understand those things, you can fit everything into that structure and remember it as part of that structure. That's how I remember all the things that I remember. I'm not reading these things most often off of a sheet. I might, like where exact words are important, like the Constitution. I might read off of an online copy of the Constitution, but I'm not going to rely too much on some AI coming up with a list of things, because you know what, that deprives you of half the point of these things. To understand, to organically process. Science is not simply about a sort of recall of fact. It's not about being a database. Science is about the active pursuit of improved knowledge, of knowledge that is closer and closer to reality as you go along. And that too can, if all you do is just ask you know ask the AI, what is this, what is that, you want to learn the underlying structure. You want that to be embedded within you, to be in you, supporting your ability to make judgments and to make decisions, or simply to when you're confronted. I mean, for example, one bit of information, one thing I learned a lot about in my high school biology class. I learned a lot about the what happens in the cell, and for example, the way the ribosomes create um, use our genes to piece together amino acids to create proteins, and they do this in the endoplasmic reticulum. And how does it get the information for that? Does the DNA from the nucleus just come out and take a trip to the endoplasmic reticulum to copy it all down? No. mRNA, messenger RNA. That's what people, there is so much, this is part of what I mean by logical depth, as I mentioned earlier, that behind many of the pieces of information that you kind of talk about to other people, behind those pieces of information, there is a literal world of information behind that. And understanding that can help you to understand, well, for one thing, when people are lying to you. When somebody talks to me about mRNA being such horrible stuff, I'm just, I know it to be a normal, often, constantly used part of how the cell takes genetic information from the nuclear DNA and exports it to the ribosome to make the proteins that, like the collagen, the keratin, the actin and myosin, all those things are created from genetic templates that are copied onto mRNA, which are then run through the ribosomes in the endoplasmic reticulum. So understanding what's going on here, oh, and the hemoglobin too, of course. It too is a protein. And to understand, like with proteins, for example, that their structure, it's not just a matter of some, you know, it's not a matter of the gene itself telling the protein how to fold. What happens is that the protein is produced, and then quantum physics and the electromagnetic forces lead the protein to fold in certain ways because of the way that the different molecules are positioned on that chain of on that peptide chain. And this is the marvelous thing about it is that also, when you have an antibody to go after COVID, for example, that antibody is its grip on that virus is created by the shape of that molecule and the electromagnetic forces that it exerts. And so it will grip onto that using those electromagnetic forces. So it's, already we're getting into, the story deepens, the story takes on new meaning because behind every little detail can be a universe of meaning. And that's something an AI can't grasp. It, it, it it's an unembedded sort of mishmash of the results of other people's thinking, other people's understanding. It just it's not yet up to the task that we're giving it, and yet we've in the name of finding out the secrets, in the name of having an automated system that you don't have to pay in order to run everything, you know, and run it perfectly like computers. I mean, I guess if you really think about it, this is you know, on and on, an extension of something that I think we've acculturated ourselves to. And this is the idea that somehow computers are smarter than we are, simply because they can appear to do all these things that, maybe we ourselves aren't very skilled at, like, doing the math on how fast you know, I have my share of resources that I go to when I'm trying to figure out, okay, how much energy does it take in order to launch 1,000,000 into the air or something like that. And the thing about it is, what you have are clever people who have encoded this into their algorithms, and it's their cleverness that we are sort of relying upon, and it's exponentially, we see in this AI stuff a sort of exponential um, amplification of this. And the attitude people get is that because you have a calculator, it's no use learning how to do the math. um, how do you tell when your calculator though is giving you the wrong answer, when it's not properly sectioning things up? How do you understand that? Or how do you understand what you're trying to use it for? you know And if you are deprived of a calculator, can you just go and write it down yourself? That's the thing right there. Um, can Do you have that knowledge embedded up here? Do you have some sort of do you have skill? A lot of today's AI seems to be about robbing from people of skill, their knowledge, their understanding. So you can have a computer do the skilled work, and everybody else will just, become an unskilled sort of peasant. And that's just a disgusting attitude to me. And it's short sighted too, because you lose some of that knowledge. You lose some of that understanding of how to do things. There's a point at which you need to maintain knowledge, the knowledge that things are based on, because otherwise you can't improve on it. Otherwise, you just lose the ability to comprehend whether your AI is doing it right or your AI is doing it wrong. You begin to lose your mastery of your own intelligence. And that's part of the thing. We need to build our own intelligence. We need to be less concerned about trying to get an AI to do it, to do what we're supposed to be able to do what we should be able to do. We ought to be kind of figuring out ways to get, to supplement our intelligence, you know, not replace it, not replace skill, not replace artistry with something that's just a good enough imitation. Because that's really the fraud in all this. That we have been truly replaced. We haven't. We can't be. Because, what are we doing? Are we handing over a basic function of our humanity to the machines? Human interaction. I mean, you can create a you know I was watching this episode of let's see, um, I was watching, well, I forget the title of the show, but talk about AI girlfriends and AI boyfriends, and while you have something that can use the sum totality of all it's ever been trained on to kind of act like the kind of person you would love to have you love them, and the woman who will never get mad at you, the being who will never, you know, get angry or, have a cross word or whatever. But it's sort of like, out of, it's sort of like Inception. It's sort of like Inception. Mal is this sort of malignant, sort of remnant in Leonardo DiCaprio's character, a in Cobb's head of his wife, who you know he inadvertently led to a tragic end, and he at the last part, and spoiler uh, for the movie Inception. In the last part, he finally admits something. He says, you can't be Mal. Mal is, you are just you can't match her perfection, her imperfection. You know that he real people can be aggravating. Real people can be a pain in the ass. I know this better than most people because I've got far less capability to let the water wash off the duck's back. But the thing to keep in mind in all this is humanity is so you know there's so much uncertainty with humanity. There's so much trial and tribulation. There's so much Sturm und Drang, if that's the way you pronounce it. Because people are complicated, because people are intelligent. And this is part of what I don't think people will really be prepared for when actual artificial intelligence arises. Is that if you get an actual artificial intelligence, you're going to get a being that isn't necessarily um, simple and compliant. the AI girlfriend, the AI boyfriend, the AI friend in general. It's like you're talking with the ghosts of other people's personalities, other people's quirks, other people. The AI is just basically the machine learning platform is just imitating far more interesting, far more complex people than it will ever be. So you're trading the superior, surprising human being for the inferior, ultimately predictable machine learning platform. As a fallible human being, as somebody who can take things too far, as somebody who's not necessarily an easy person to know always, and somebody who can make colossal big mistakes and misperceive things. The thing about being intelligent is that you are capable of getting yourself in trouble that other stupider beings and entities can't even imagine ways to get into. But that's part of the charm of humanity. That's part of the charm of being an embedded creature in reality. Too many people want to remove humanity from the equation on the on the premise that humanity is ultimately flawed and what we need to do is evolve towards something more perfected. And the truth of the matter is, as we try and recreate intelligence, the aspects of our imperfection are the outward mask of all the little qualities that emergently create that very intelligence. That in order to create true artificial intelligence, we will have to create a being that is as I am making this prediction that we will have to create a being that is as imperfect, as unknowable, as lacking, as apt to make mistakes, as apt to screw things up. We will have to create something that is as imperfect and as flawed as we are. Because a lot of our flaws are the result of different aspects of the system that builds up in the brain and elsewhere to create our personalities, to create our interior life, to create our ability to reflect on things and make assumptions and whatever. We are, I mean, the part of it is, like evolution itself is not about absolute perfection and the creation of such. Evolution is about something that is good enough to survive, that can survive long enough to reproduce, and that will differentially be reproduced in the face of all the environment, all the competition, all the internal squabbles in the species itself. Um, so I guess the big thing I would tell people is that we have not yet reached actual artificial intelligence. But in the meantime, we need to foster and support and teach skills to our natural intelligence, not prematurely burden systems that are incapable of actual intelligent behavior, of actually conveying and understanding meaning. We need to learn to value our own natural intelligence and to anticipate that when artificial intelligence really shows up, when computers really become smart, that we may not be dealing with uh, some sort of perfected being, that we may simply be dealing with something that's just fairly screwed up like we are, that we may be dealing with something that needs, to be talked down off of things or whatever. We're just, we're congratulating ourselves on the birth of AI, like Morpheus said, but the birth is premature. We are getting we can have something that can create a chat with you that seems so much like another person. We can create something that looks like a drawing and it can seem like it's somewhat original. We can we can train an AI in order to replicate Luke Skywalker, so he can have a conversation with Anakin Skywalker in some locations, and we're kind of missing that the imperfections of doing it the doing it with our intelligence, that I think will yield much more lasting meaning, will give us much more lasting uh, joy and emotional wealth. The At a certain point, it's better to produce good work than to produce a lot of bad work. Yeah, we need to create more treasures and fewer bits of cheap garbage. Well, that's enough for today. I'll see you guys later.